Imagine being the first person to set foot in the pyramids after being empty for thousands of years. Or maybe you dug up a necklace worn by some princess in ancient Greece. Or maybe you find a spear used by a Viking during their invasion of the British Isles. Archaeologists do all of these things. They're the ones out in the field, finding the lost relics that time has forgotten. Without them, our museums would be empty and our knowledge of history would be incomplete. Archaeology has an interesting history and is a vital part of academia. To help understand archaeology, I'll tell you about its history, its purpose, and its importance in modern times. Like so many things, we can't truly understand archaeology without knowing its history. According to the Age of the Sage website, the exact origins of archaeology as a discipline study are uncertain. People have been evacuating monuments and digging up tombs for thousands of years. An example would be in ancient Egypt, when oftentimes the tomb builders would raid the tombs of the pharaohs they built it for to steal the goods after the pharaoh died. But we can compare this to during the Renaissance, when a man named Flavio Bedoyo created a systematic and documented guide to the ruins and topography of ancient Rome. This was all during the 15th century. The difference really lies within the intent. The tomb raiders in ancient Egypt did it for personal gain and for money. They would sell the treasures they dug up to make extra cash. Well, Bedoyo did it perfectly out of respect for history and academic gain. He wanted to know about ancient Rome. He wanted to know these things. We can also look at something archaeology concerned itself called the Equitarianism movement. Antiquitarianism studied history with particular intention to artifacts. Antiquitarians were the ones really were interested in finding artifacts to fill with museums. They do this so that the nobles and rich people could go and look at the museums, and then turn antiquitarians could kind of gain a place in the upper echelons of society. Now that we know some of its history, I'll tell you what its purpose is. I've found whenever I tell people I want to be an archaeologist, they say that, oh, you want to dig up dinosaur bones, which is not what archaeology is. That's paleontology. An example I use is paleontology is like Jurassic Park, archaeology is like Indiana Jones. For an actual definition, we look to the American Archaeologist website, which would be archaeology is the study of ancient and recent human past through material remains. It is a subfield of anthropology, the study of all human culture. There's many types of archaeology, from prehistoric archaeology, which studies human history from before recorded history. This would be cavemen in most of the world, and in the Americas to before the European colonization, since most Native Americans didn't have a written language. We have historical archaeology, which covers the historical accounts of the world. And this is the field from when mankind created writing and hieroglyphics and the like, and started recording history. There's also biblical archaeology, which is the study of human history from biblical eras and around the Holy Land, such as the Middle East, Egypt, and parts of Europe. We have underwater archaeology, which studies underwater. An example would that be there's a pyramid in Japan underwater, and archaeologists have to scuba dive or use submarines to get to these ruins. Archaeology is also part of history, but it's much more reliable than written history, because written history is usually biased. It also follows material evidence rather than the word of the historian. A description of a fact can be very precious, but it's only one description or many, and they oftentimes match each other because of propaganda. A quote I'm reminded of actually comes from a video game, Call of Duty, in which one of the characters says, "History belongs to the victors." So while in an ancient battlefield we might look at history and it said one side was good and noble and fought for all the right reasons, archaeology can tell us a very different thing, and that both sides had the reason to fight. And now that we're familiar with the history and purpose of archaeology, I want to tell you why it's important to modern academics. As I said before, archaeology is a scientific study of the human past. With it, we were able to expand our knowledge of human history, and we have found loads of information about human history that we didn't know. For instance, if you're familiar with the Greek poet Homer, he wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, which is about the war of Troy, and Odysseus, one of the heroes of Troy, journeyed home. We, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, thought Troy was a myth, that the city was just some fabricated place like Wonderland or Atlantis. But in fact, we have found ruins that we very much believe are actually Troy. They match the description and site, and we have evidence of gigantic walls surrounding the city. According to the MSU website, without many of these things archaeologists have discovered and unearthed, our past, as written by history books, would be very different. And as I said before, historical records can be biased and sometimes just plain wrong. It's not only important because it helps start museum and write history books, but it also helps us understand who we are and where we came from. Since archaeology traces humans, it can also map migration of human populations. For instance, if I say someone is Celtic, most people would associate them with Irish or Scottish, maybe even Welsh. But in fact, the ancient Celtic peoples lived all across Western and Central Europe for thousands of years before that. They were later driven out by other tribes such as the Romans and Gauls and Germans. Archaeology also helps us uncover the fact that modern European languages come from an area in India, and these are thus dubbed Indo-European languages. Without this kind of information, we really wouldn't have been able to advance ourselves historically and understand our past. To conclude, I told you today about the history, purpose, and importance of archaeology. As I previously said, archaeology has an interesting and history and is a vital part of modern academia. Now imagine what the world would be like if you had explored those pyramids sooner, or if that Greek necklace of a princess had been found 100 years earlier, or if you had found that Viking spear yourself. Archaeology is an incredibly valuable part of learning history and is something that we can all take an interest in.